Hello, I'm Danielle Brown, and this is for course EIU 4158-600, and I'm going to be discussing John Milton's essay of Areopagitica and its relevance to the Bill of Rights. So, the purpose of this is to examine the arguments that a famous author, John Milton, had about opposing government laws of licensing and censorship that the Parliament began using. And this author became very important in the 1600s. The essay that he wrote to Parliament focused on 4 huge reasons that the country should not be required to abide by the licensing and censorship laws. And Milton discussed why the government should not be able to prevent writers from expressing their beliefs. He claimed that printers and writers could be held responsible for their published work if they were to be allowed to express what they felt that they needed to share through their writing. So, and this information is also relevant to the to the course objectives because it sparked the beginning of the actions of the First Amendment. So to start off, I'm going to go back and talk about the preceding events before Areopagitica. And in the 1500s, Europe had many printers working, about over 1,000 printers, and books were both imported to the country and exported. And after a huge shipment of heretical books had arrived in Europe, the clergy in Europe kind of freaked out. They were very alarmed by this, and so they had to respond quickly, and they responded by creating 2 laws. And they created a system that was called that controlled the authors and printing presses, and they had to have a licensed press, and also every written material was to be censored to make sure that it was good for the public to read. These laws limited a great amount of what authors could write or what printers could print, and they were taking away the freedom to express one's ideas and opinions to the public. John Milton, a very well-known author in Europe, he did not agree with these laws like any other writer wouldn't, and he responded to these laws by publishing an unlicensed and an illegal tract in 1644. And he titled his work Areopagitica, and in this tract, Milton attacked with 4 main arguments about why the Parliament should abandon these restraints on the country. So I'm going to talk about the 4 arguments, and let's start off with the first one. The first argument that John Milton used was that licensing has been somewhat rare throughout the history. According to the article titled Areopagitica, Milton's Influence on Classical Thought, it said that not very many countries have used this law at all, and the places that it has been used in has had very damaging effects on individuals and the country as a whole. Many countries who have had this law eventually started falling apart from each other, and there was not very many successful countries heard of that have used the law of licensing at all. Let's move on to the second argument, and the second argument was one of the strongest ones. Milton believed that reading is a very valuable tool, and he asks, how is it possible that such a small group of people can control what is to be read and what is not? And he's right. Who's to judge what we're supposed to read? That would be like someone telling us what we can and can't read on the internet, or what articles we can and can't read in the newspaper. So reading is simply too valuable to be controlled by such a small group of people when you have a whole entire country that is wanting to read these things. So the textbook titled Freedom of Speech in the United States, our textbook for the class, says that Milton went about his second argument by showing that censorship weakens character of individuals. This is a statement well said too. How is a country to build character if they only have one point of view forced on them and they cannot learn from any other views? If a person is to have strong character, they need choices, and they shouldn't be deprived of those choices either. And a quote from the Areopagitica explaining that freedom of expression is what makes our future was said like this: when there is much desire to learn, there of necessity will be much arguing, much writing, and many opinions. For opinion in good men is but knowledge in the making. And this quote pretty much explains that people need to be able to express their own opinions, or the people may never find better solutions for the country to keep going in a positive direction. And as for the third argument, John Milton expresses that the laws of censorship and licensing will never work for the country. The small amount of licensors would never be able to prohibit all of the unlicensed publications. The cost to do this would be outrageous. It would be way overboard, and even if it was possible for the Parliament to do this, information that was censored would squeeze through the cracks anyways by some other sort of communication, like speech or artwork, or people could rebel to these laws by the clothing that they wear. And Milton brought up a very controversial point here. And he really put the Parliament in their place and made them ponder on whether or not they really could ever have absolute control over the licensing and censorship laws. So Milton ends his essay with his fourth argument, and he says that the law of licensing is hurting the country of Europe. And if all materials are censored, the country will lose knowledge and character as a whole. And he argues that there will be no variety of books to gather knowledge and values from if they are all censored, which is correct. St. Lawrence Institute for Advancement of Learning stated in their article that Milton said people need free expression of thought not upon their inherent virtue, but because of the fact that no one person is virtuous enough to properly decide on the right books for all to read. And that's very true. How can they even possibly read all of the books to even judge them whether they're to be right or wrong for a person to read? So that was a very good point also. John Milton had many more works other than this piece, but none of them compare to how important this piece of work was for the influence of the First Amendment. As the U.S. History.gov states, the First Amendment, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. As you see how Milton's work of the areopagitica greatly supports every idea in the First Amendment, you can see how much influence Milton has on the Bill of Rights, and his arguments were major steps into the development of a philosophy of a political freedom that gives us the right to communicate. So the last thing I'm going to talk about today is the significance of John Milton's essay, and that is that it holds the structure of our laws of free expression today. John Milton was a very powerful man to the history of our country to be able to speak out to a very strict government like the Parliament and make them ponder in their situation that they have put themselves in, instead of throwing the man in jail who was criticizing them. So not many men in history have been able to do that, or even keep the peace like that, and many people couldn't even do that even if they were a government official, and he wasn't. Not many could write a letter like he did, attacking and criticizing a law the government has made, but he also gave reasons behind his attacks too. He expressed his theories of why censorship and licensing would not work, and he asked questions to the Parliament to get them thinking if they were in the wrong too. So Milton expressing to the government that he felt controlling what goes in and out of the press can be done by holding printers and authors responsible, it made a big influence on the First Amendment of the Constitution. These issues Milton focused on in the areopagitica are still issues that we face in our country today. We face issues of the controversy between lawful societal control and freedom, and through whatever type of communication, printing, speech, thought, it is always going to continue this argument over and over, and it will continue to be one of our biggest importances in the media-dependent society. So, thank you.